why you should develop magnetism. If we could see all the forces that play against us, seen and unseen, of course, those that we can see. But behind those are many, many forces which are constantly playing against us, influencing us. And so surely we should develop some magnetism to offset these various forces of nature, and also subtle forces, and of course the greatest force of God, the spiritual force of God. So it is necessary to understand these magnetic laws, unseen but very potent. And those laws can penetrate time and space. They are beyond time and space. That's why they are so subtle and so insidious, because of their nature. But we have a defense against those if we will but use it. Magnetism, the definition I find is this: the attractive force in the universe. The attractive force in the universe. But still there are other forces which have this magnetism. There are two great forces in the universe: the force of repulsion, the creative force, and the force of attraction, or that force which is pulling all things back to God. That's the greatest force if we will keep in tune with it. But these other forces are tremendous. The force of creation. Think what has gone on, what God has done with that great force of repulsion, that outgoing force. Of course, the attractive force is greater, but it's interfered with by 1,000,001 things. That's what we have to understand, that we follow this, why we should develop magnetism. We should know the reasons why we should. Now, there are many kinds of magnetism, just a few of them, divided into three general classes: physical, mental, and spiritual. Or physical magnetism as animal magnetism, that force of the intellect, that there is a magnetism there. Then there is a moral magnetism, or the mental magnetism. Finally, there is the magnetism of the soul, or spiritual magnetism. Any and all of those play an important part as they play against us as conscious rays of God. Physical magnetism must be developed. Why? That we have a healthy body. Mental magnetism must be developed, that we have a mind that amounts to something, that we have efficiency of the mind, as the Master said. But the greatest thing is spiritual magnetism, that we have God's love, which is the food for our souls. And as He has made and is in and through all things, that is our greatest need. But we should know about these other things, especially animal magnetism and those things which resemble very much spiritual magnetism, because it is found in the children of God, in their bodies as the vehicles of spirit. So we must understand the difference, lest we get under the influence of animal magnetism. Now, however, before we go on to that, there is one thing about this delusive, creative, magnetic force, or Satan, if you want to call it that, which we should understand. That force is an individual, positive, conscious force. It just does not happen. But it has the consciousness of God in it, because it is His consciousness in the cosmic drama of life. It has a magnetism. It is a delusive magnetism. Otherwise, why are so many attracted to outward living? Only because of the magnetic power of the satanic force, which takes us into relativity, duality, makes us feel separate from God. That's what does it, nothing else. And finally, through desire, makes us, even against our will, reincarnate and get rid of the desires. So we must understand something about this creative, delusive force, or that old fellow called Satan. He's conscious, he's organized, Look at the people around you. Where are they heading? I don't know. But they're not heading toward God, I'm sure of that. A lot of them. They are under the spell of the satanic magnetism of creation. That's why, if it were not so, if it did not have that power, then God's great attractive force would soon pull us all back into his being, and this world wouldn't be where the devil can carry on. That's why it is. It's a definite positive force, this creative force of delusion. Now, we being children of God, made in his image, we are under a tug of war. And that tug of war is, we are under the attractive pull of God on one hand, the great attractive pull of his love, and on the other, we're under the influence of this repulsive force of creation, satanic influence, and that tug of war goes on. You can see that the dependence of this worldly living is the result of that great satanic force. I have told you that the attractive force of God is greater, that force that holds the planets and heavenly bodies in orbit, and that attractive force is greater. It offsets that great repulsive force of God, and everything is turning back to God in time. But in the meantime, we can get into an awful lot of trouble by being under the influence of this repulsive force. And so it's good to realize that, whether you like it or not, this tug of war is going on in and through each one of us. On one hand, it is God's great attractive magnetism, and on the other, it's the outgoing satanic influence of creation. That's all it is. It is the result that hurts us. If we follow the creative magnetism and are influenced by it, we have, the worst is, separation from God. We feel the duality. We're here and God's there. And desire makes us fulfill those desires and be reborn again. Those are the bad points, so to speak, the undesirable points about this outward creation. Of course, God is in and through this outward creation. As you look at the flowers, you see. But there are other things which bind us. Even those flowers can bind us if we do not want God more than the beauty of the flowers. So we must understand fully this great repulsive force or repulsive magnetism which influences us tremendously. But thank God, God's attractive force is greater. His attractive magnetism, his spiritual magnetism is supreme, if you can stay in it. But if you put something that neutralizes the pull of God's magnetism or any electromagnetic force, you offset it, it cannot operate. And that's just what we do. We put a barrier in between us and the great pull of God's love, his spiritual force. And we do it by allowing ourselves to be influenced more by this outgoing force of repulsion. That offsets. It is supposed to offset it. That's the way this business is set up, this outward business of outward living, this worldly existence. It wouldn't stay long because God's power is terrific. It's the greatest power in the universe. But to keep the play going, I guess the Lord lets it go on. He has created it that way. The setup is that way. Now, since the goal of life is union with God, it is up to us that we avoid being under the influence of outward physical or animal magnetism, and tend more to the receiving of the pull of God's spiritual magnetism. Animal magnetism is a very undesirable force, even though it comes from God's children, because it keeps us from knowing God. That's the thing. It keeps us away from him. It keeps us from feeling and enjoying and benefiting from his great pull of spirit or spiritual magnetism. The illustrations of animal magnetism, well, for instance, one comes to my mind is the snake. The snake, you know, through animal magnetism will influence and hypnotize, so to speak, other animals. Then there is the animal magnetism of certain people with a physical bent, physical characteristics, they have a great influence because not of their spiritual magnetism, but because of their animal magnetism. They influence you unless you are careful, because that's the power. It's the power of God, except it is called physical magnetism, or more commonly known as animal magnetism. We have to understand these things. I have a reference at this time to show you the importance which our Master places on animal magnetism from one of his books, his writings. This is from the Self-Realization Fellowship Lessons, which I hope many of you who do not will take them. They are very, very valuable. Here we read, a person under the influence of animal magnetism may move here and there, yet be acting solely under the influence of another individual's instincts and habits. Here the consciousness is apparently free from the influence of hypnosis, but in reality is secretly guided and prejudiced by another person. How can you win? You can win. You can win if you just listen a little longer. So animal magnetism must be known and must be offset. And it can be offset because of the one Supreme Being. Now let us come to the point of soul magnetism. Soul magnetism, and the definition which the Master gives, is this: the soul's power of moving toward God. Your own power, my own power, the soul, which is a ray of God's consciousness, moving toward Him, is the magnetism which we must know we must be one with. That's soul magnetism. Magnetism of various kinds can be developed by associating with strong people of the magnetism which you wish to develop, exercising the characteristics of that magnetism. For instance, physicians, businessmen, artists, those following artistic lines, and finally, spiritual people. Now take your choice. What do you want to follow? Do you want to follow any of those, or which do you want to follow? Make up your mind. And then there are certain laws which you must obey to receive the magnetism of those people. For instance, you must, with affection, follow them. You must have loving attention for their advice if you want their magnetism to flow to you. These are the two main laws: close association and loving, respectful attention. Master used to always say, give loving attention in your meditations. An indifferent attitude is of no value. But when you meditate, keep your attention here where you're trying to contact the greatest of spiritual beings, God Himself. You must have loving attention. There must be affection and love. Then it'll work. Now this applies to following any of these four cases that I have taken: physicians, businessmen, artists. If you want to be a great musician, pick out one and be that person's being almost. Follow them affectionately with love, and especially spiritual people or a spiritual person. You must follow them if you want to receive their magnetism. You must follow them not just in a haphazard way, but with affection and love. Loving attention is the greatest thing. Now, for instance, a person who deeply meditates on the image of a spiritual man, his likeness, and with loving attention tries to be as he is, or follow his teachings which he has left, as for instance our beloved Guru, the magnetism from that spiritual person automatically flows to you, because you have not left any obstruction. But if you are indifferent and follow in an academic way and not with feeling and love, then his magnetism will not flow to you. That's why, if you take the pictures of saints, as pictures of our Master, for instance, and you meditate upon that with attraction and love, realizing you're not meditating on the picture, of course, but you're meditating on the Spirit of the Master, which is in the omniscience of God, which is behind the picture. If you do that with loving attention and try to imitate him as he was if you knew him, or according to his teachings which he has left, if you do those things, his spiritual magnetism will automatically flow to you and change you. You'll be a different person. Why? Because you're not following the animal magnetism of a person. You're following the presence of God in that particular spiritual person, and the results will surely come. And so this visualization of a saint as the starting point, a picture or an image as we have in our altar here, that starts the ball rolling, so to speak. And that visualization is beyond ordinary outward laws. It is in the region of magnetic laws, which are beyond time and space. To give you an illustration of what the Master one time did for me, I have told you many times, I will not repeat the story, just to say that I was caught out in a storm at one time, and as I was following the Master as best I could, as the voice of God, so to speak, and I found myself in this terrific predicament, what did I do? Well, I remembered his words, and I did what he told me to do. He said, remember, doctor, when you're in the holy vibration of Om, no force in the universe can come to you, can affect you, can harm you. And I needed help just then, and I needed it badly. And so I looked in the spiritual eye, remembering his words and feeling the things which he had imparted to me as best as I was able to understand and assimilate those things. And immediately the response of his spirituality came in the form of a great spiritual eye in the midst of the storm. And with it came the consciousness that all was well. Now, how did that happen? That just didn't happen. That happened just according to the laws I have pointed out. That if you become one with that spiritual person in every action as best you can, realizing that he is a channel of God, then that spiritual magnetism will flow. And that's the greatest thing in the universe, is the spiritual magnetism. And so, everything came out finely, and I was unharmed. Why? Because I followed the law, that's all. That'll work not only for me, it'll work for everybody. Because aren't we made in the image of God? Aren't we made in the same mold? We must operate that mold, that's all, and understand and utilize the power of spiritual magnetism. Another illustration I have is of, for instance, of how spiritual magnetism works. Take the case of our saint, the great Babaji, who has such a nearness to omnipresence of God that he hardly has any body, as you can read in the autobiography. And yet, due to the law of spiritual magnetism, if you honestly within your heart ask and feel, and that you need his help, and take his name, that's all, Babaji, feeling, according to the law of the operation of these higher forces, you will immediately receive spiritual blessing and help. Now that doesn't work through the laws of time and space or mind. That works through the laws of spiritual magnetism, beyond time and space. Immediately you will receive help. Many of you perhaps have done it. I personally have many times. Now these are wonderful things to remember as we discuss this heading, why we should develop divine magnetism. Another point is this, to bring up about Jesus. Of course, we're all familiar with him, but the spiritual magnetism of Jesus is what? An outward expression of an inner awareness of his oneness with God as the Christ consciousness. Not only an awareness in a vague sense, but when he could actually see the light of God. He could actually hear the cosmic sound and so be in tune with these great cosmic forces. And finally, he could actually feel God's all-solacing love. That's why Jesus had power. That's why you and I can have power, if we obey the laws of magnetism, especially spiritual magnetism. Jesus actually saw God's light, actually heard the cosmic sound of Om, actually felt God's love flowing through him. Why? Because he merged in the presence of God. Didn't he say, I and my Father are one? Why? Because he heard the cosmic sound of Om. He saw the light at the Christ center, and he felt God's solacing love, because he merged in the presence of God within as the holy vibration. Self-realization will give you those methods whereby you can do the same thing. Didn't Jesus said, the things I do, ye shall do, and greater things? Let us realize that. Do not think you cannot do it. As long as you think you cannot do it, you will not do it. Give God a chance to show you that you are his child and that he loves you and wants to do something through you. That's the greatest thing. But when you think that you cannot do it and depend on your ego consciousness, it'll never be done. It is not you or I who do anything according to God's grace. It is because it is God's will and he's the doer. We are not the doer at all. That's the stumbling block. He's the doer. That's why Jesus said, who can increase his stature? How can any one of us make a cell of the body? Because we cannot, we do not know how to do it. But God does, and if you tune in with him and allow his spiritual magnetism to flow in and through you, things will be done according to his will. And so that's a wonderful thing to realize from a practical standpoint why Jesus had the power he did. It was the outward expression of an inner awareness. You see, not an inner idea or some thing which is not tangible, but an outer expression of an inner awareness of the presence of God, of which Brother Lawrence spoke so many times. That's the thing. Then it simplifies it so much, doesn't it? It simply shows us, if we've got any sense at all, seek God first, and all other things shall be added unto you. So much for spiritual magnetism. Now, going on a little more, there are other important rules about developing and retaining magnetism. First, self-discipline. How can you obey the laws of magnetism, especially spiritual magnetism, if you cannot control yourself? How can you obey them? You cannot. Therefore, self-control is the greatest thing. And our Master has left the ways and the means to practice self-control. It's not something imaginary. It's very scientific and practical, if we will but do it. Self-control is one of the important things. Then also be master through self-control of your actions and such things, so that you do not lay up desires. Desires simply mean they will have to be fulfilled. And if you lay up desires, you will have to come again and fulfill them. Or you'll have to fulfill them in this life. And if those desires are not the kind that make the possession of spiritual magnetism easy for you, then they're a detriment. So watch your desires. Desires are very, very important. Someone told me a little story about desires that I just put in my book this morning. Didn't have chance, to study it, so I could give it fully, but the gist is this, that there was a certain man who really believed in prayer, and he believed in praying for ordinary things. Well, why not? God is the doer. He said, why not? So he prayed for an automobile, and it had to be just a Ford, just a certain automobile. That's what he prayed for, and he was very particular with God to be sure that he asked for everything he needed. So he prayed for all the things that go with it, the radio and the chrome and all such things. And he prayed fervently because he was a man of prayer. And finally, the car came. The car came with all the fittings just as he wanted it, because God is very exact. So he gave this gentleman the car just as he wanted it, exactly. And so he, being a man of prayer, he once more prayed and thanked God so much for his car, his Ford car, which was just as he wanted it. And the Lord said, well, my son, he says, that's all right. He says, I'm glad that you got your Ford car and it has pleased you. But he said, I had a Cadillac saved for you, but you were so hell-bent on that Ford that I gave it to you. So that's how he is. That's how God is. He's very practical. He gave him what he wanted, but see, if he'd have said, Lord, you know what I need. You just give me the car that you want. See what he'd have got. So let us understand this thing about desires. Desires have to be fulfilled. One time, Master had a Cadillac, and I knew enough not to get enthused, and I was just looking at it casually. He says, don't get desires, he says. Well, you'll have to get one. So I figured the cost a little bit in that. So desires is another thing. Desires is another thing we must watch in developing magnetism. If you want God, that's fine. Have all the desire you want for him. But for other things, be careful, because the law is the same. The law is exactly the same. And finally, the greatest of all is this, is to keep your most important engagement, which is with God. That's the most important thing to remember if you forget all the rest of it. If you keep your most important engagement with God, self-control or no self-control, desires or no desires, he will take care of those things. So keep your most important engagement, which is with God. Meditate regularly. Make the contact with him. And when you feel him with affection and love, what happens? You become as he is. You become as he is. And his great spiritual magnetism, which supersedes all the power of the universe, flows in through you. And that's why Jesus healed people, raised the dead. Why? Because his Father did it through him. God is the doer. He has all the magnetism of all things. If we but make friendship with him, contact him, feel him, love him, allow him to flow through us, then he operates easily. But we think we can do it. We get into lots of trouble, and finally, when we're knocked down and jumped upon and had enough of it, we turn to God, and in his compassion, he says, all right, come on now, I'll take care of it. So this is perhaps the greatest point. Keep your most important engagement, which is with God. Regularly meditate. Do not let every day slip by. The first thing, this life will be gone, and we'll have to go through it again. Who wants to? Why not attain God right now? Why not develop that spiritual magnetism which he is waiting to give us, that we can enjoy this living, and above all, never be apart from him? Separation from God is the worst thing. If you have nothing, but you feel oneness with God, you have nothing, not a cent. You're better off than a person with all the money who is apart from God. Such is the power of God's magnetism, his spiritual divine magnetism. And in closing, I read from Master's lessons once more, in which he points out so wonderfully the things which I have tried perhaps to bring to your attention. He says, if you keep yourself feeling and sensing the all-attracting divine magnetism of Om, that's the key. Don't just sit there and think about it, but attain some definite contact with God. That's the trouble. If you do that, you will develop a power which can uplift people by the mere contact of sight, or even by your simple wish, or your powerfully directed uplifting concentration. By this power you can draw angels. Angels means great forces of light. This whole universe is light. Light operates all things, rays of light. All the functions of our body are operated by rays of pranic energy. And so the Master says, by this power you can draw angels, all creative luminous forces, savants, and past saints to come to you and dance in your joy. By this divine magnetism you can draw all rays of knowledge to come and sparkle and scintillate around your being. God is the doer. If you want to develop the greatest magnetism, which will protect you from all forms of undesirable magnetism, attain oneness with God, be one with him, his spiritual magnetism is sufficient to protect you, and greatest of all, to draw you up into his bosom of spirit.